one of my favorite strategies to accelerate learning is to increase technical debt. So one of my principles is always build to learn, then to scale. And by building to learn, it means technical debt pile will skyrocket. But it also means that if the feature proves out to be wrong, we just trash it. We don't continue it. But if it proves to be the right one, we need to pay the debt off. But what happens? When I introduce this strategy, some software engineers look at me and say, yeah, but you PMs are all the same. You come with this beautiful speech, but the moment we deliver something, you jump to the next, and then we are left alone with a bad code. So I'm not going to build something bad because I don't believe in you. What the developer is saying is, I don't trust you.
Welcome to the Product Agility Podcast, the missing link between agile and product. The purpose of this podcast is to share practical tips, strategies, and stories from world-class thought leaders and practitioners. Why, I hear you ask? Well, I want to increase your knowledge and your motivation to experiment so that together we can create ever more successful products. My name is Ben Maynard, and I'm your host. What has driven me for the last decade to bridge the gap between agility and product is a deep-rooted belief that people and products evolving together can achieve mutual excellence. This episode sees me, Ben Maynard, talking to David Pereira. David is a strong voice in the product management and agile communities, has over 8,000 people who are listening to his ideas, thoughts, and thought-provoking statements on untrapping product teams. So when David and I got together for a conversation, it was a match made in heaven. We spoke about trust, which is a reoccurring theme on this podcast, and the effect that has on our ability to do the jobs we were actually employed to do. David teased us with this idea that actually he likes technical debt. Now, this was something that I couldn't quite get on board with at the beginning, but I slowly warmed to the idea. It was interesting, and it makes a lot of sense, I have to say, now I reflect on it in hindsight. So, without any further ado, David and Ben, over to you. Welcome back, everybody. I am here with a gentleman who I wasn't aware of until a few months ago, and now I don't seem to be able to get away from his brilliant content or his lovely style, I think. But most recently, I think on LinkedIn, I saw you'd done a post about a number of books to really help product management. I think the service you give to the product and agile world is fantastic. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce David Pereira. I hope I said that adequately.
Yeah, that's right.
Good. I spent a good few minutes trying to practice saying David's name correctly, so I'm pleased that I got it good enough. David, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Now, sir, just so that the audience can get a little bit of a flavour for who you are, would you mind giving a short introduction to yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I have been, let's say, in the same equation, different parts of the problem. Like started as a software engineer around 15, 16 years ago, and then moved to product manager, then head of products, and now as a CPO. Have been working with digital product since the beginning of my career in the automotive industry, public sector, trade marketing, e-commerce, and so on. So I have seen a lot in my life, and I have made a lot of mistakes. So maybe this is one of the things you like when I write, because I share my mistakes openly, hoping that someone learn from them and won't have the painful road I had. So that is a little bit about
David,
me.
for a second then, I thought you were going to say, I've made many mistakes, and this is just one of a number of mistakes that I'm making. I thought you were going to imply. I was like, I love your humility. It's nice to hear people say that they make mistakes.
We learn from them.
Yeah, what was your favorite mistake?
Favorite mistake? I have many mistakes, but there was one about quality. So there was a kind of a job I didn't want to do. So my manager once asked me, I want a screenshot of everything that was delivered over the last 3 sprints. I said, why on earth do you want that? He said, I don't care. I just want it. I said, okay, that's it. So I got all the screenshots and I sent the screenshots. And it was very poorly done, and I put in a Word document and so on. And then he asked me, would you sign off here? Would you say that was done by you? Is that the minimum level of quality you deliver something? I said, for sure not. He said, if you don't want to do something, you just don't do it. If you want to do it, you ask more questions. And then I was about to go into the victim mode saying, yeah, but I asked one question and you were very arrogant. But I said, yeah, actually, I cannot be the victim. I need to ask more questions. That's my job as a product manager. I ask questions. So that was something that stuck with me. I always look and say, is this the minimum level of quality for this I'm trying to do? And then I reflect, and sometimes I say, it's not. So I need to get it better now.
Wise advice. So I feel that we can segue quite nicely into the topic that we had spoken about at the beginning before we hit record. And I'll glance down to take a quick look, which is how often I think many of us find that we are not able to do the job we were hired to do. And I suppose that is applicable to most jobs. I can't recall many people who have ever turned around to me and said that the job they are doing is exactly the job they were hired to do. And you get those awful moments sometimes when you hear about a manager or someone in an organization get asked, can I have a copy of my job description? Because the moment someone's asking for a copy of their job description, you can guess they're probably somewhat dissatisfied with the type of work they're being asked to do. So, David, I know you've written a lot around various different traps that different types of people in product development can find themselves in. So, where would you like to start on this?
It's something I have been reflecting for a while. So I write a lot about product management and agile. I tend to focus on product managers. But I was reflecting coming from my career. When I was a software engineer, I struggled to get to know the problems I am supposed to solve by the solutions given to me. And then I was asking many, many people, okay, what is the problem behind it? What are we trying to achieve? And then mainly, people didn't know that. And I realized what I was trying to achieve was to meet a deadline. I didn't know the problem I was solving as a software engineer. And by asking too many questions, I was seen as the annoying person. But I thought that my job was to create valuable solutions. And valuable solutions means they solve a problem that someone potentially has. So that was my part of software engineer. Then I moved to product manager. And in the beginning, I was excited about it. There was this saying, the product manager is the CEO of the product. But as I hit the corporate firewall, it didn't take long for me to become a backlog manager. And I struggled to understand the needs behind the wants of stakeholders. Everyone told me what they wanted, and no one told me what they needed. And even if I asked the question, I didn't get there. And curiously, the same problem as I had as software engineer, just in a different layer. Then I moved to head of products. And then I thought, now I solved this problem because now I can define things. And then I had to talk to top management. And all of my conversations went from moving from output to outcome because they gave me a lot of output to deliver. And then I had to know the outcome. I said, okay, what does success look like? And it was always the same. For some point in time, I tried to avoid this trouble. So I tried to create mechanism to identify in the interview the level of, let's say, agility a company would have. So how empowered are teams? How empowered to make decisions product managers are. So I tried to understand this during the interview. And then I had to actually drop many of the interviews because I didn't see the empowerment. But now I have a different take on this. Just understand the scenario and then figure out how you can change it. Because most companies, they simply haven't experienced a different way of working. Then you need to know what to fight for. So now I'm looking more, how do I transform this situation to better instead of just kind of moving to a victim, end up saying, well, it is what it is and I cannot do anything. So that is the scenario I have observed.
I am curious about a number of things, and I pause because I'm trying to figure out exactly what should be the correct order of asking you these questions. The one thing that does spring to mind, and if we keep it focused on your specific example, the idea that we are often given outputs rather than outcomes, it's easier for people to ask for the solution rather than to articulate how they'd like their behavior to change. I am curious to know, how much of that do you think is something which is hardwired within humans to always jump to a solution versus how much of it is because of the prevailing system of technology companies? And I use the word technology companies on purpose, not talking specifically about like real mature established product companies, like companies where you have a technology side and a business side and maybe a product in the middle, if you're lucky. And it's really just a game of cat and mouse at the contract game of the business asking for more and technology saying less, and kind of a contract being agreed. How much do you feel it is that prevailing system of technology companies with supply and demand versus some natural human hardwired instinct to always seem to come to the solution, never the outcome?
I think there's a lot of this hardwired and also childhood related. There's this famous sentence, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. So
Yeah.
that's one of them. And I remember barely when I was, let's say, high school or maybe beginning of my education, I have to do a lot of exercise about solving one thing here, delivering a presentation, doing a research. I barely knew what I was trying to solve with that. I was just executing. So that how the education in Brazil is, you receive a task and you get it done. And if you get it done the task well, then you get a good score, get a good grade. And then it comes this thing of demand, right? Because I think technology is quite new for us. Like, let's say, the digital product management, because we are quite good in building things. You look at roads, house, and so on. And all of this, you can use that pretty well on output orientation, because you can say, I want to build a road. Okay, it's a road, of course. You can say, I want to build a way to move from A to B, and that might be different alternatives for that. But in building things, we're good. We create a plan. The plan looks nice, and we follow the plan. And if we're very good with planning, we can get it very well. And then it comes to the part where wired. There is something in our brains that is psychological. We fear the unknown. And that, we don't make any peace with that, because it's a kind of a survival instinct. If I don't know what is waiting for you, I don't know if it's safe. If it's not safe, I'm not willing to step there, because might be very dangerous, and I don't know how dangerous it is, I'm avoiding. But if you name a solution, then you know where you're stepping. Then it's not dangerous anymore.
Mm-hmm. So solutions provide an element of certainty which can reduce the fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
I was thinking about my question as you were answering it so well, and realizing that actually I think there might have been a fundamental flaw in the question in the first place, because ultimately the people that are maybe hardwired or not are the people that have created that system. So maybe it was kind of one of the same question, really, which you answered very well. So humans like a solution. I also think that, from my observations as a human, that we love short term. We find it hard to think longer term. And whilst we can learn how to do it, our general reaction is to quickly think of something that we can get, right, or something that we want, something we can hold, right, rather than talking about the motivations behind it. I mean, I find myself doing this a lot. There's a Discord channel, like a support channel for a product that I use. And the first thing I do now is always moan about the problem that I found. And what I'm teaching myself to do is to not moan about the problem,
but talk about what I'm trying to do. Because I think with products, often there's a difference between a defect and just UX that maybe needs to be tweaked. Like someone hasn't fully understood what people are going to be trying to do with a certain function, and whilst it may be working as expected, the way that it's taking you through that doesn't quite tally. So again, looping back round, the jobs that we are hired to do, but we don't feel like we can. I know that I spent far too many hours of my life in workshops around role descriptions. We're trying to pin it down for people and trying to come up with more and more elaborate kind of articulations of what the role is there to do. And yet, people never did what they had chosen to put into the role description because there was something in the way. And you mentioned earlier something called the corporate firewall. What was it you meant by the corporate firewall? Because I'm wondering if maybe that's an answer to a long-standing question for me.
So I see a couple of things there. One is the process orientation. So the corporate firewall is you have to follow certain process. Depending on how big the organization is, the more complex the process will be. Let's say you have to color inside the lines. So if you want to do something different, there's no process, you cannot do it. Example, roadmap is defined on quarterly basis and it's defined within the top management. But let's say as a product manager, you were talking to a customer or someone and you found an alternative there. And then you want to do an experiment, but that doesn't contribute to the roadmap, but may contribute to the objective you have. But it's not in the roadmap, you cannot do it. So you need to wait and to pitch to get that inside the roadmap, if there's a process for that. So this is one of them, the process orientation, because this tends to kill creativity, but ensure that it reduces the mistakes people make. And the other one I see quite detrimental is the opinions over evidence. So everyone has an opinion about something. And what scares me is not this. I have an opinion about many things, but it's that opinions tend to talk louder than evidence. Either the evidence is not even there, or just I want this because I talked to someone and you don't even know who someone is, might not even be the audience. Then you end up in this situation. And it comes to the other brothers. There are two brothers. They tend to make things a bit more complicated in collaboration. It's the been there and done that. So these two brothers in the corporate firewall, they are there. You go and you bring an idea, and someone will say, "Yeah, I've been there, done that, doesn't work." But what they forget to say is like, "It didn't work the way we tried." And we have no idea what you're saying might be a little bit differently, and you may bring what was missing that time. So some people say Scrum doesn't work, but they forget to say Scrum doesn't work the way we did. But maybe if we do it differently, it can work. So this being there and done that is a big problem.
We don't think logically, do we? I think if people want to make a point, you're better off making it emotionally and making it as pointed as possible. If you just want to close it down and move on, if the person you're working with doesn't prioritize your desire or a collective desire to go for something, then they'll shut it down in the quickest and easiest way.
Yeah.
And I recall, there was one particular situation, and actually this something you said really reminded me of this. I was in a meeting with my fellow peers, head of engineering, CTO, with some of the managers of the teams, and I spent some time beforehand looking through what the teams had produced at the end of the last sprint, and just out of curiosity, because it was a big organization, looking at forecasted versus actual, and I could see that most teams they pretty much met their forecast. Some had gone over, they'd exceeded it, and a few hadn't. And a particular manager started off this kind of weekly get together by saying that none of the teams had met their sprint forecast. And I was like, who told you that? He was like, oh, well, like such and such. Like Jeff told me that. I was like, okay. I said, but it just isn't true. And thought, what do you mean it isn't true? I'm like, well, I've looked through, and yeah, sure, a couple didn't meet their forecast, but some exceeded, and everyone else met. Because yeah, I would love to be saying this was a conversation about how close they were to achieving an outcome or the feedback from the users or stakeholders, but the consciousness of the organization wasn't there to have those conversations. And even though there's evidence provided to the contrary, the fact that one statement, that one pseudo fact that no teams have met their sprint forecast, that was enough. That was then the narrative that played out. That was then an opportunity for people to jump on that and say, oh, Scrum doesn't work, large scale Scrum doesn't work, and this isn't worth trying. Not based upon any fact, just pure emotion, right? Because people were waiting for that emotive opportunity
Yes.
to latch on to something.
I see a lot of this. And I see one very dangerous behavior, which is an obsession for planning. It's connected to the fear of embracing the unknown. Because I come from Brazil, and in Brazil, we are very bad at planning. We want to do things and get things done. So that means we agree on a goal. And then we say, okay, let's agree on the first step, and then we go from there. Because we just don't like talking about planning. And that is a little bit of an agile mindset, because you set the goal and agree on the first step as a team, and then you go learn and adapt to the next. But then when I came to Germany, that shocked me, because they wanted to know the next 10 steps and the alternative if one of the steps would go wrong for everything. And then we got into and once I came to this reflection to one of the senior managers, said it intrigues me that we put this amount of people in the room to talk about how to get the work done, and we invest massive amount of time talking about how to get the work done. And then we start getting the work done, we face the reality, and we had to change the plan. We get everyone back in the room to adapt the plan and talk again about how to get the work done. So for me, that just makes no sense. Sorry for that. And yeah.
No, it's sad. But so much is like that. I don't know what it is. And I'm not sure if it is different in which geographic regions. But as somebody once said on a great YouTube video about simplicity, is that people spend so much time wasting their time planning and replanning and trying to deal with the complexity of things through making a plan which was devised for something which was complicated in nature, not something which is unpredictable. And I was having a conversation with my wife, who doesn't listen to my podcast. I go figure out what. I've tried to get her to listen, but for some reason she's not interested in hearing me talk any more than she has to. And I said to her, my mind is just full of today things. I don't really care about like what time my kid has to go to a birthday party today, because that's a tomorrow thing. And I'm not going to plan my day around that. I'm just going to see what happens. And she's like, no, I'm becoming the same. We find that as our lives have got busier, we've become better at prioritizing what decisions we have to make and when. And so now we're very much like, is this a today thing I need to know, or is this a tomorrow thing? Because if it's a tomorrow thing, then let's spend some time tomorrow learning and remembering those things. But there's no point me knowing what time my son has to go to a party in 3 weeks' time. Like that isn't useful for me to know that. And then we started reflecting and wondering, well, perhaps, and that is a change for both of us. We wondered if perhaps our levels of anxiety had reduced. They were better able to live in the moment and were less anxious about the what ifs, because, we know what we're trying to achieve. We know what ultimately where we want to get to with raising our children and having a family. Those little micro decisions, they can just wait, as long as we know we're going in the right direction. So I think for us, it was the anxiety, and maybe it's the organizational anxiety that leads people to plan and replan continuously.
That's quite interesting. You mentioned exactly the point. What ifs? These are the traps we currently face. The what ifs, they create a lot of trouble. 3 months ago, we were setting, for example, our product principles. What do we care about? What do we prioritize to make our work easier? And one of the product managers shared a concern, saying, sometimes we start talking a lot about problems we don't have and we ignore the ones we do. And then I said, that's quite an important principle because we've got to deal with the current problems over the future problems. Because once we fix the problems of now, then we can talk about the other ones. But if we don't really have a problem right now, why are we spending time on that while keeping the current problems open? So was one of the principles we set there, and it has helped us quite a lot because whenever someone starts talking about the what ifs, we say, that might be something, but as of now, we already have enough on our plate. What about getting solved the problems ahead of us that we know, and the ones we don't have right now, we just don't have it.
I know that is an art. It's such an art. How much of that comes down to trust? Like I know there's anxiety, and we want to be able to delay decisions and the rest of it. But how much of it comes down to trust and respect? And not having the trust or wanting to give people the benefit of a doubt.
A lot, because the culture of the place will play a lot on this. It's like this fearless organization, psychological safety. Because as a software engineer, no one is gonna commit to something if the person is afraid of being blamed when something goes wrong. But if the person knows the product manager will be on the same side when things go wrong, then the person will commit to this. But that's a matter of trust. Do I trust the product manager? I have a clear example to you. One of my favorite strategies to accelerate learning is to increase technical debt. So one of my principles is always build to learn, then to scale. And by building to learn, it means the technical debt pile will skyrocket. But it also means that if the feature proves out to be wrong, we just trash it. We don't continue it. But if it proves to be the right one, we need to pay the debt off. But what happens? When I introduce this strategy, some software engineers look at me and say, yeah, but you PMs are all the same. You come with this beautiful speech, but the moment we deliver something, you jump to the next, and then we are left alone with a bad code. So I'm not going to build something bad because I don't believe in you. What the developer is saying is, I don't trust you because of bad experiences in the past. Then I have to work on that.
So, David, let me get this right. You are saying that there is a game that you play, and I'm looking down because I couldn't quite believe it when you said it, where you try and increase technical debt.
Yes, that's right.
That sounds like
It
madness.
is a little
David.
bit, but I have it's a bit obvious what I'm about to say, but if you want to get to where most people don't get, you need to do what most people don't do. And I figure out to accelerate learning, you need to have some hacks. For example, suppose I have just done some experiments. I tried some prototypes and so on, and users like that. And now I want to scale that. Should I build the whole solution now? Of course not, because I had weak evidence. I have evidence people would be willing to use it. But what they say and they do is slightly differently. So why would I encourage a team to build the full solution first? So what I encourage them to do is what is the fastest way we have to hack a solution, quick and dirty, to put it live for a small portion of our audience, like 1%, 2%, and learn from that. And this enables us to go. And to do this, I tell them, let's go wild, let's increase technical debt. And the moment we realize this solution would pay off, meaning that would create the desired outcome, then we step back and then we pay our technical debt. So I say that this is build to learn, then to scale.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering if we might have a topic for our next conversation there, because I think that there is a interesting conversation around the future of debt because I think debt is a really broad topic, and I think there are many different types of debt that we can build up way beyond technical debt. And even technical debt is a huge topic. But I wonder, maybe we could pick that up as a conversation, because that could be quite intriguing. I accept what you say, like, build to learn and then to scale. And I wonder if, has technical debt had its day? I wonder. Is it time just to start waving the white flag? But we can, maybe we can go a bit
Sure,
deeper
this
on
is
that next
I
time
would say
around.
so. This is a very interesting topic, which is often ignored. It's a kind of taboo. We don't talk about technical debt. We don't use that as a tool. So let's ensure we don't have technical debt.
Yeah, I think this is interesting. All right, maybe that's the next conversation. But let's loop back round, because when we started this conversation, we were saying about why is it that it's so hard to do the job you were hired to do, and we've explored maybe some things around trust. We've still explored some things around people jumping to solutions and the problem of being whether you're a software engineer, whether you are a product owner, product manager, whether you're a chief product owner. The job you're hired to do is to create meaningful outcomes, right, and to affect your bottom line profitably. But the problem is that when you're in those types of roles, people will generally only ask you for output, so it's hard to do the job you're hired to do. I think this is the same for agile coaches. At times, I think it's the same for many people in many different roles, and I think sometimes it comes down to a natural evolution or growth, which I guess is okay. Your role grows, it evolves, it changes, the context around you changes, and that's somewhat acceptable. But I wonder if we go right back to the interview, and you think of a time when you've been interviewed and people have been asking you questions which makes you feel that this is a great place to work. Right? How many of those questions were actually because that's the reality, and how many of those questions were actually because they figured that somebody who is skilled in this particular profession should know the answers to these, but we haven't really thought about whether or not they actually get to apply those techniques in the on the ground, as it were. So it is some of the problems about the way that people are interviewed and the assumptions that we make in regards to what job we're walking into.
Yeah, I think it's very related to the assumptions we make, because as a product owner or product manager, I assume I am empowered to make decisions. I assume I own strategy, and I own also setting key results or objectives, product goals. I assume that. But then when I go to the interview, it's very traditional that the other side of the table, like the hiring manager, will try checking some boxes. There's certain skills where the hiring manager will search if I have the skills, and then I may get a case to solve, and then I have to solve the case, and then I show what I can do. But we are not really talking about the job itself. So one of the things I learned during the interview is once sometimes I do something blunt during the interview. It was going this direction, and I look at the hiring manager after 15 minutes. I said, I'm going to say something you're not going to like. This interview sucks. And then the hiring manager looked at me. Wow, what do you mean by that? I said, I'm going to pass on this interview because I will have the skill sets you're going to ask. I will give you an experience for everything, but you are not going to know how I work. And I don't know how you work either. So what if you give me a problem you have right now, and then we talk about this problem, and then I walk through my thoughts, and then I say how I would solve that, and you tell me where I can act on my own and where I need somebody else and how that works. And then we went to that. Then I created a mind map, went to a part where I would go to the roadmap, said, okay, let's talk about it. How does it work? And the interview that was supposed to last 45 minutes lasted 2.5 hours. But then we got to know each other, and I understood the challenge I was going to face. And it was one that I liked, and I ended up getting an offer, and I accepted. But I had to drive the interview to a direction that we could get to know in depth how the work looks like. It's not only finding a match for the person and the position, you need to find a match for the person in the whole ecosystem of the company.
Yeah. But I don't think that people have got the courage to push hard enough, often in interviews, especially given the way the job market is at times, and particularly now, I think for some industries, it's a hard market out there. And you get an interview, I wonder if people's necessity, I'm not even going to call it a desire, necessity to have money coming in means that, taking the risk and pushing it a little bit and doing what you said was fantastic. I agree. I've always been a huge fan. I brought this up with Teodora Bozeva when we had her on talking about the Kanban maturity model, about getting the teams to interview people and getting people actively engaged in it. I mean, if you're walking into a product role and you're going to be facilitating impact mapping workshop or road mapping workshops, or you want to figure out how it's all going to work, then why not have a go at running one of those? Get involved with a team and actually meet some people, because otherwise in an interview, your example there was fantastic, but you've got a person in front of you who is the only indicator as to what the culture and that organizational system is like. And if you don't take those opportunities to then test that and figure out, well, am I going to fit here? How will you know until you're beyond the point of no return or easy return? You've got the job and you're stuck, and you end up getting pushed into things that you don't really believe you should be doing.
That's a super valid point. And in this interview, for example, after we had this 2.5 hour conversation, the hiring manager asked me, like, all right, what is the next step? I said, the next step for me is the natural one. I want to get to know the team. So I invited myself to have a half day working with the team. I said, I join here for breakfast in the morning. I get to know the team. We do something together here. It doesn't matter what. We just do something and we see if as human beings, we like each other. And if that goes well, then why not? But I think, given the what you said, it is a time now that sometimes we have the choice and sometimes we don't. So the example I gave, I was employed. So I was not searching for a job. Someone invited me for a conversation, so I could play like this. But if I was the one searching for a job, then I would say I would just set the minimum characteristics I want to find, and I would try asking and identifying if that is present or not. So it's kind of the job to be done, right? What is the job you are trying to get done? Is it to get money, to pay your bills, and accept at least something, some compromise? Or are you trying to level up? What you need to know the job you're trying to get done.
Yeah, that is hard. It's so easy to say, isn't it? And I think so hard for people to do. It's so hard because I know the amount of times I'm talking to people who are going for agile coaching jobs, and they're like, "Well, should I? How much do I push this? How do I find out whether I'm being employed as a convincer or a coach? What if I do want a convincer and I don't, and I don't want to do that? Then I've kind of blown that job interview." And I think it is really hard for people. But I think that one solid piece of advice I wish was much more prevalent was what you did and what I've done in the past, which is get to work with the teams, because any role description, any job description that's written down, rarely, if ever, does it talk about the type of interactions that should be present, or the type of relationships which you're expected to nurture, or the nature of those relationships. And this is something that I spoke to my good friend Saloni about in an episode about a year ago, I think, about actually how can we take this kind of traditional, really staid view of job descriptions and role descriptions and say, well, no, how do we focus on interactions and relationships that have to happen between you and other people? And if we spent more time exploring that rather than, can you do X, Y, and Z, or have you ever faced this problem? I think that probably people would end up saying no to a lot more jobs.
It's what Jim Collins said in one of his book. I think it's From Good to Great. He said, first, write people on the bus, and then where?
Yeah. Yeah. All about that bus.
Yeah.
All about that bus. But I think, I wonder, at a senior level, I think that happens more often. Versus at a senior level, often people pick people that they know, or people come with recommendations. I think it gets harder the more junior you are, I suppose, the more desperately you need for a job. It's a kind of sick side effect of the system. Right, David, I would love to keep talking about this, but I think that perhaps we should bring this conversation to an end and have a little chat about what we talk about next. But before we end this, Are there any closing thoughts or anything else you'd like to say on this topic?
Sure. What I learned was the following. I used to be idealistic. I used to think on the top of the mountain, very beautiful, and picture that and complain about everything that was different than that. But now I am more pragmatic. I picture the top of the mountain, and instead of shouting to people, saying, "Come here, it's very beautiful, just come and join me on the top of the mountain." Now I move on. I go down the mountain and I meet people where they are and I say, "Let me help you climb this mountain. Let's go one step ahead, one step after the other." And then I try picturing what is the very first step we can do right now. And most of the times I realize that it's just removing the stone from the shoes, and then that enables us to move. So instead of shouting from the top of the mountain, meet people one step ahead, and then step by step you can get to the top.
Lovely. And I don't often follow up a guest thought of one of my own, but it does remind me of a conversation I had a couple of weeks ago on a workshop where somebody wanted to wanted to increase the velocity of the teams. And we all know that that's not the right way to view things because it's very easily gamed. But I was really proud at these people who I'd worked with for some time, and they came to the conclusion that actually the one thing that they should measure isn't our teams increasing their velocity, but what's the average cycle time for us resolving impediments raised by the teams. And I thought that is that's removing stones from shoes. That isn't kind of shouting from the top of the mountain telling them to go faster. That's getting down there with them and saying, right, let's actually figure out how we focus our energies on clearing the path for you rather than just telling you to produce more.
That's great.
And on that bombshell, my most overused term on this podcast, that bombshell. I edited 2 of those out in the last episode. We will wrap up. David, thank you so much for coming on and embarking on this little expedition around our own little mountain, around how are we not being able to do the jobs that we're employed to do. And in the next conversation, who knows what we'll talk about, but perhaps if we agree, it might be this idea of the future of debt, which does sound like the kind of topic of a financial podcast. So maybe we need to rethink that a little bit.
Sounds good.
So thank you very much for your time, David. Thank you everybody for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
What a brilliant conversation with David. I feel like it was a meeting of minds. Well, at least one mind I met. I'm dubious as to the efficacy of my own mind. But that is a conversation for another day. Now, next week, David is coming back for another episode, so be sure not to miss it by heading to our socials. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on TikTok, we're even on LinkedIn. Get on there, follow us, so you don't miss the next episode. In fact, you've taken the time to listen to this, puts joy into my heart. So thank you so much for coming along, and we really look forward to welcoming you back next week. Now, for those of you that are hanging on to the end here, I used to do custom outros, as in a little bit of a recap on the episode. I'm not going to do it on this one. Let me know what you think. If you care, I'll hear from you, and if you don't, then who knows, one day they'll come back. I'm Ben Maynard, and this is the Product Agility Podcast.